vamos a la próxima conferencia. Esta va a ser una conferencia virtual. Vamos a estar utilizando los mecanismos de la tecnología. No sé si estamos listos. Sí. Va a estar con nosotros el señor Chris Lowney, quien fuera seminarista jesuita. Actualmente es el director de la Junta del Common Spirit Health, el sistema de salud católico más grande de América, con más de 100 hospitales y 150,000 empleados. Anteriormente fue director administrativo de JP Morgan Corporation en Japón, Singapur, Londres y los Estados Unidos. Sirvió en el Committee Administrative de Morgan en 3 regiones diferentes. Y luego de salir de Morgan, se ha distinguido por la autoría de 6 libros, incluyendo el bestseller Heroic Leadership, Best Practices from 450-Year-Old Company That Changed the World, que ha sido traducido en 11 idiomas. Sus otras publicaciones incluyen Pope Francis, Why He Leads the Way He Leads, y Everyone Leads, How to Revitalize the Catholic Church. Es graduado de la Universidad de Formar en Nueva York y se han otorgado múltiples doctorados honorarios. Su conferencia, Formar el liderazgo. Si nos está escuchando, nos gustaría que pudiera encender su micrófono porque no lo estamos escuchando nosotros acá.
Okay.
Okay.
Now it's good?
Now it's good.
Okay. Thank you so much for the kind introduction. And after one moment of panic, now we are fine with the microphone. Y desgraciadamente no puedo dar la conferencia en español, lo siento. Estudiaba el español en la escuela superior con los jesuitas, incluyendo en Colegio San Ignacio, allá en Puerto Rico, pero parece que no aprendí bien, lo siento. Entonces voy a hablar en inglés. And you'll see my title, and I tried to reflect the themes of this conference, and you also see my email address, and if you wish to be in touch after, I will be very happy to hear from you, to share the slides. If you wish to share the slides in your own work, by all means, it's fine. And let's go to the next slide, Felix. Felix will be helping me with the slides, so you'll forgive when I speak to him at times. And I might ask you, I cannot see the auditorium right now, but anyway, why don't you raise your hands if you believe that the world now has become faster, more complex, and involves more change. Please raise your hands. And even though I am not there, magically, I can predict exactly what is happening. I guess about 90% of hands are in the air. Please put them down now. And we all believe that we're living in a very complicated, complex world. And the military has given us a very useful acronym to describe the world we now have. Let's look at the same next slide, Felix. The military tells us we live in a world that's become VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And I want to frame my comments with this idea because VUCA has enormous implications for leadership and how we lead, and for leaders in the Christian Catholic tradition that I will also speak about. And just to reinforce how important and difficult leadership is in a time of VUCA, let's look briefly at the next slide. I will not read all of it, but you'll see just from the first sentence, the accounting firm Deloitte surveyed if you can prepare your students with leadership capacity, they are going to be moving directly into a world that clearly needs this capacity badly. The second paragraph I will not focus on, but you'll see it kind of somehow all relates to VUCA: complexity, rapidly evolving, ambiguity, and so on. Let's now go to the next slide, Felix, and I guess I want to make the point, especially for those of us in a faith tradition, that it's not simply VUCA, the fact that things are changing quickly, it's also the nature of the change. I will not go through the items on this page, they're all self-explanatory and obvious, but the underlying point is that not only is the world complex and changing fast, but it's changing in trends, ways, and directions that many of us feel quite disturbed about. Certainly those in the Christian tradition would look at these things and say, there is some aspect of calling for us in looking at these things. We need to be somehow showing some leadership. And so now let's turn to the next slide, and I ask you a question, and I'm going to give you a few seconds for quiet reflection. And let me invite you first to think about the names of one or two living people that you would consider to be good leaders. And then why do you think of these names? Please think also of the personal attributes, qualities, characteristics that you would associate with somebody who is leading well. I'll give you just a few seconds. And Felix, now you can take down the slides just for 5 minutes or so. I will talk without slides and then go back. So, who are leaders? People thought of wonderful names, I'm sure. I bet somebody in this audience thought about Pope Francis. I wonder who thought of their own name. I guess nobody, next to nobody. We're under the umbrella of a Catholic university in a conference that is talking about Catholic themes, and of all in the theme of this conference, the first people we will need to think about as leaders are ourselves. And what do good leaders do to motivate the people You must love those you lead. Is right from the dictionary. You'll see different definitions of the word leadership, of course, but they will always include one like this: to point out a way, direction, or goal, and to influence others toward it. Isn't it true that everyone here is doing these words all the time? We're not holding a sign and literally pointing a direction, but by our behavior, how we use money, how we treat other people, how we use our time, we're implicitly pointing a way and saying, this is how human beings should function in society. So, if we are to have any good influence in public life, in civic engagement, surely it must begin with each of us in some way showing our own leadership and pointing out by our behaviors, our priorities, the right kind of direction. Now, we're also coming to this conference under the umbrella of our Catholic tradition, and let me speak for a couple of minutes about how we might connect this idea of leadership, which seems a very secular, businessy idea, to a faith tradition. And let me first say that for those of us in the Christian tradition, leadership is a kind of a paradox. Because I guess if I asked you to speak about yourselves as what does it mean to be a Christian, most of you would use words like that have a follower idea, like it means to be a follower of Jesus. And indeed, our religious language uses words like vocation and disciple that have a connotation of following. Voco means I call. If I call, you come to me, you're following me. Disciples learn. But look, our religious language also uses words like apostle and mission. And these words, of course, have exactly the opposite meaning. Missio means I send. If I send you somewhere, you're not following, you're going. And so this is how we might understand the paradox of how leadership works itself out for us as Christians. In other words, it has a following component. We're following Jesus' words, but it also must have a dimension where we're showing leadership in our family. For those of you in the university, of course, in the classroom, and in the theme of this university, of this conference, in civic life as well. Now, to push further on the paradox, I guess a few people are uncomfortable still with using the idea of leadership to talk about ourselves. After all, we just heard about from Cardinal Maradiaga. This is a cardinal. We're a hierarchical church. He's a leader. Pope Francis is really the leader, not me. But look, when we were baptized, if you read your catechism, we were all baptized, we're told, into some share of Christ's identity as priest, prophet, and king. This is the Catholic Catechism, not some nonsense from an American from New York City. And surely there are no more leadership kinds of words than priest, prophet, king. So in some way, we must take upon ourselves, if we're to be true to our baptism, some calling to show leadership. Well, this is the most important theme that I would want everybody to take away. The understanding that life and Christian life is giving me a leadership opportunity and responsibility now, whatever is my state of life. And let's put the slides back up, Felix, and we'll go to slide 7. And this will show the other themes that I would want to emphasize about leadership. We'll go forward one more, Felix. Perfect. In a time of VUCA, we need to show leadership in all frames, certainly in the Christian frame. And I want to talk about a few of these themes. And in a way, it kind of constitutes what we might call a spirituality of VUCA, a way of understanding leadership in a very spiritual way. The first idea, we're each called to embrace a leadership opportunity and responsibility, I've already just introduced and discussed. The next big idea will be that we all need to keep improving our leadership skills all the time by being loving, being a servant in how we interact. And let's go to the next slide, Felix. And I want to tell you a story that helps me to reinforce this point about the skills we all need to acquire and keep improving. And this is a story about Pope Francis. The photo is not Pope Francis. I could not find a photo of him doing the laundry. So this one we'll have to do. As you heard in the introduction, I wrote a short book about Pope Francis' leadership style, and I told stories that Jesuits who knew him in Argentina as Father Bergoglio had told me. And one of them told me that when Bergoglio took over the rectorship of the Colegio Mejor on the outskirts of Buenos Aires, it was in terrible financial shape, and he told the seminarians that they could no longer afford to pay people to come and wash the dishes and clean the hallways. They had to do the work for themselves. And Bergoglio said, I will do the laundry. This will be my job. And these Jesuits told me that in those days, if you got up in the morning very early and went into the basement, you would see Bergoglio throwing people's dirty underwear and gym clothes into a washing machine. But what does this have to do with leadership? They didn't explain, but I felt that what they were saying to me was channeling the idea of a leadership definition that the US Air Force used to use. And let's look at the next slide, Felix, you'll see it's there. Leadership is the art of influencing and directing people in such a way that will win their obedience, confidence, respect, and cooperation in achieving common objectives. Well, I think that when Bergoglio stood up there in front of the seminarians and basically said, well, I'm sorry, we're in a difficult position, we all need to sacrifice, and I will go first. I'll show the way. This really won the respect and confidence of these people. And to transfer now to my message for the rest of you, I'm not asking you, if you're the rector of the university, to do everybody's laundry. But what I am saying is, in our communities, our families, our classrooms, our jobs, part of showing our leadership means treating other people in such a way that wins their respect and confidence and cooperation. And if we had more time and I was in person, I would invite us to tell stories about the kind of behaviors that from your managers or teachers won your respect. And in a couple of slides, I'm going to anticipate what some of those may be. But first, let me take a little more value from this doing the laundry story. Because I guess when Bergoglio offered to do the laundry, he was not being manipulative, I think. In other words, he did not say to himself, aha, if I volunteer to do the laundry, they'll be trapped and they will have to do what I want. Rather, instead, this gesture, I think, reflected his vision of how leaders treat other people and win cooperation. And let's go to the next slide, Felix, which will help me to, one more. Perfect. This will help me to reinforce this point. A few of you remember this photo. It's the first Holy Thursday in the time of Pope Francis. And you'll remember he went to a juvenile delinquent center and washed the feet of the people living there. And then he stood up after and said a little homily. And basically he said, I'm doing this because I want to, I want to reinforce the point that authentic power is service. In a way, it's perhaps a strange idea. We think that power means the opposite, that people serve us. They do what we tell them to do, what we ask them to do. But you may know that there's one vision of leadership that turns this idea completely in the opposite direction and says, no. When I am managing people, when I have authority, when I'm leading people, they're not serving me. I'm serving them. In the sense that my job is to treat other people in a way that respects their dignity, nurtures their human potential, helps them to flourish, helps them to develop their potential. And you probably know that this way of thinking about leadership has been developed as a school called servant leadership. And in a way, it's trying to translate into a real world approach the vision or idea of Jesus, who said, remember, at one point, the Son of Man is not here to be served, but to serve. And think about these ideas I just shared, the way we might think about how we serve others, helping them to flourish, respecting their dignity, developing their potential. If we behave in this way in all aspects of our life, it clearly is developing our call, answering our call to be engaged in civic life and in public life and to be engaged well. We can't do this in isolation. We can't be servant leaders in isolation. It requires others. And let me make one other point, which is this way of leading, loving leadership, servant leadership, it's not being nice. It's not something that I say just because we're in a sort of a Christian conference. It's the way that good leadership is done, period, in all frameworks. And to demonstrate my point, let's go to the next slide, Felix. And this is taken from a piece of research that McKinsey published. The citation is in the bottom right corner. You can look it up online. And they asked their corporate clients to talk about the behaviors that characterized the most effective leaders on their teams. And this was in a corporate setting, nothing to do with religion. But look at this list. These individual behaviors, in most cases, I suspect, are exactly the kinds of behaviors that you would have described if I asked you to tell me what are some of the behaviors that might characterize a loving leader, a Christian leader, a servant leader in a business setting. So my second big theme, we can now go to the next slide, Felix. My second big theme was this idea that we need to keep improving our leadership skills because this is the only way that we win and hold people's respect and confidence and cooperation. And I told the doing the laundry Bergoglio story to make the point that an important pathway for us to do this turns out to be very consistent with Christian ideas about being loving and being a servant. To come to the third point now, love is going to be an effective way of role modeling leadership for us. It's also going to transform us into more courageous civic and social problem solvers, which is a theme of this conference, of course. So first, now, to begin to venture into this idea that love will make us better civic problem solvers, let's go to the next slide, and I just give you a quote from Sheryl Sandberg, who was the chief operating officer of Facebook at one point. I know we no longer admire Facebook, but it's a good quote, so I leave it here. And at one point she said this: leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making sure that impact lasts in your absence. Beautiful quote. Exactly captures this call, this notion, this idea that we're here as leaders, but above all as loving leaders, servant leaders, Christian leaders, to be making others better as a result of our presence, whether it's those we teach or those who are living in Ponce who don't have the necessities of life or good enough healthcare or good enough education. We are motivated, called to go out and do something about this. And let me plunge further into this idea that we're motivated or called to go out and do something about this. And in order to reinforce this idea, I want to share with you another quote from a guy who is largely credited with developing the idea of servant leadership. And he makes the very interesting observation that for much of human history, think of the medieval era, the way that individuals took care of each other and conveyed love and service was often in their individual community capacity. Now, especially since World War II, we have big institutions. And these institutions are often the ones who are in these roles. And therefore, the point for us is that we're somehow called to redeem, to make more loving these institutions in order to have the right impact in civic life. Let's now look at the next slide, Felix. Look what he says. Whereas until recently, caring was largely person to person, most of it now is mediated through institutions, large, complex, powerful, impersonal, not always competent, sometimes corrupt. If a better society is to be built, one that's more just and more loving, then the most open course is to raise both the capacity to serve and the very performance as servant of these big institutions. I hope you perceive where I'm going. In the theme of this conference, it's not our job to stand apart from, sit apart from, and be completely uninvolved with some of the institutions that we wish would work better, like the public healthcare system, the public education system, the political system, even, I'm sorry to say it, the church, in the way it sometimes functions in society. Rather, if we're called to lead, part of our calling is to help make these institutions serve their role in society in a more just and a more loving way. And I know that for all of us, that will seem daunting, impossible, distasteful, but to help us with that, let me share another quote about love, one from Pope Francis. Let's go to the next slide, Felix. And Francis at one point says this: "One who loves has the imagination to discover solutions where others only see problems. One who loves helps others according to their needs and with creativity, not according to commonplace ideas. He is a creator, loves lead you to create. It is always in the lead." Love is our style of being leaders as Christians. Love can make us more effective leaders by winning the cooperation and confidence of others. And the power of love even goes further. Love often inspires us or gives us the motivation to find solution to problems that are important, problems of justice that others don't seem to focus on. Well, I've, in a short amount of time, I hope, painted a very challenging canvas for all of us to show our leadership in the world. And what I want to do, because I'm mindful both of time and I want to give folks a chance to make a comment or raise a question if they wish. For the moment, let me just share one more slide, Felix, the next one. I'll make one more point, and then I will invite any comments or questions. And if we still have a minute at the end, I may close with sharing one final slide. But for now, let me just talk about this one. Then we could have some question or commentary. So, our spiritual tradition, you know that I myself was a Jesuit. In the Jesuit tradition, this is called the examen. Our tradition tells us that every day we need to take some little break and step away from the world and think about how it's going. I, up to now, have laid out a very ambitious and difficult calling for us. And let me say that we'll only do that calling well if we're reflective people who are every day stopping to take a little stock of, gee, how am I doing? How is it going? Am I doing what I want to be doing? Am I being the best person I should be? I put here the image of a race car driver taking a pit stop, because every race car driver is smart enough to know that it's impossible to drive a 500-mile race without stopping for fuel and tire change. But we live our daily lives often like idiotic race car drivers who never stop for fuel or tires. And so, at a minimum, maybe we could think of 3, 4, 5 minutes after lunch, at the end of the workday. During that time, no telephone, no social media, no music, no nothing, just me and my Creator. And I remind myself, why am I grateful? We spend the whole day thinking about problems. Think about, why am I grateful as a Christian? And lift my horizon. Remind myself of my calling. And third, think about the people I've met so far today, the situations I was in. Reflect on whether I behaved as a loving leader should behave. Did I behave and show leadership at all? Or did I shy away from this part of my calling? And then maybe take away some lesson that might serve me in the next few minutes, few hours of my day. Okay, I have one or more slides I could share, but I think it's important that we have a little bit of time for question or conversation. So how about if I pause here for a moment, and Felix, you could take down the slides again, and if there is a question or comment, that is most welcome. And if we have a moment or two before 12:30 still remaining, I could share one final idea before we all go away. Let me stop first to welcome any question or comment.
¿Preguntas? ¿Comentarios? Chris, you're still there?
Don't worry, I'm certainly
Okay.
here. I turned off my camera only for a few seconds to have my cafecito.
Okay. I think we are ready to see your last print.
Okay, good enough. So Felix, why don't we go to slide 21? It's the next to last one. Forward. Let's go, yep. And let's go one more slide. And let's go one more slide. Perfect. Well, here is the final thought I might like to share with you all. So I laid out an ambitious agenda for us as leaders. 1, accept our leadership calling and responsibility. 2, keep improving every day our practices as leaders so that we can win the respect and confidence of others. 3, role model a loving servant leadership style because this is what will inspire us, motivate us, challenge us to be in the world, engaged civically, engaged in public life, solving problems. 4th, that we will only do this well if we have a habit of reflecting every day on how we're doing. Are we filling our calling? And finally, comes courage. Without courage, nothing can be accomplished well. And you've been reading this quote from Nelson Mandela. And let me comment on it and connect it to our lives. Many of you I saw in the auditorium are too young. But I myself remember when this guy came from jail. And I remember watching him those first months and thinking, oh man, I mean, what gifts this guy has. All the natural courage, all the charisma, all the self-confidence that I wish I had. And then many years later, I read this quote, and it was as if he was smacking me. As if he's saying, okay, Chris, your theory is that everything in South Africa came easily for me because I had all this natural self-confidence and courage. No, my friend, I was afraid. So now what's your big excuse in life? And let me tell you something. I've had the privilege to work with and alongside many very successful people. And I do not know all their stories by any means. But in the few cases where I do know their stories, let me tell you this. Everybody's afraid. Nobody has enough self-confidence. The people with enough self-confidence are the narcissists. And they're not the solution here. But for the rest of us, I already encouraged you to the virtue of self-awareness, of doing some reflection, examine. And if we're reflective people, one of the things we realize is that we're sinful, we're weak, we're stupid, we don't live up to our values a lot of times. And for many of us, this will hold us back from feeling confident or courageous enough to step forward and show the leadership that might be available to us to show in the different arenas of our life. And for me, leadership does not mean that one day I will wake up and have all the courage I always wished I had. Rather, to me, leadership is more about that we understand our weakness, but also we believe, in this case as Christian people, in the idea of calling, and that we honor the calling that's come to us in baptism and in life, and that therefore we're willing to step up and do our best and try to show leadership in the arenas that are present to us. Our family, my colleagues, my classroom, my university, my community. So with this, let me thank you very much for listening. I'm terribly sad I could not be joining people in person and for lunch, but I must go to Spain tomorrow, so it was just impossible. That is my loss, and let me wish you the best of luck with this important conference, and as you show leadership in your life and in your work. Thank you, and thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lowney, for your excellent conference. You led us with the compromise and the obligation to form better leaders for our country, of course, and for our university and for our faith, and with the hope that we could make them. And thank you for all your wonderful quotes, for remembering me, Sherry Sanders. I love leaning, so I enjoy your quote. And hope to see you soon in the island. Come to Puerto Rico. It's very hot, very nice this time.
Con placer.